Regarding rapier dancing, I know, I mean, it might sound a bit strange. Do you stretch your arm, then you just go forward and lunge, or other way around? When you want to thrust with
Always arm first.
Arm first, okay.
Yeah. There are fundamentally two reasons why. The first is, probably better if I, okay. Where can you see best? Okay, at the moment that I step into measure, okay, we are now both in measure. Yes, generally speaking, if I can hit you with a lunge, you can probably hit me in terms of measure. Okay.
Yes.
So as I go into measure, I need to be controlling my opponent's weapon.
Yes.
And you do that through a leverage advantage on the blade.
Yeah.
Okay. When you have that advantage, the extension of the arm, if my opponent's weapon stays still, I'm going from, say, this part of my sword in contact or close to their blade to this part of my sword. My leverage advantage just got hugely bigger.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you're extending to gain that advantage of leverage, but also to present a clear threat.
Yeah.
Okay. So that my opponent is now much more likely to react to my blade.
Yes.
Than they are to just do something random.
Yes.
Okay. So as I step into measure, I've got that extension going, and when I have the blade relationship that I want, the lunge is short and quick, or relatively long and quick, but I'm wearing socks and I haven't warmed up, so I'm going to keep it fairly short for now. Okay. But if I lunged first and then stabbed, then I don't have that leverage advantage on the blade, and I'm not presenting a threat. And what any people do it, and sometimes it works, but in a perfect world, anyone who did that would get stabbed in the face immediately. Yeah, so it's a kind of a fundamental truism of pretty much all sword arts. George Silver, as I mentioned earlier, he expressly states that there are 4 true times, which is the time of the hand and body, the hand, body, and foot, the hand, body, and feet. And the false times, which will get you killed, are the time of the foot, the time of the feet, and the time of the feet and body, and the time of the feet, body, and I forget the false times, because basically, I don't care so much about the false times, because if I just stick to the true times, I don't have to worry about
no, that's okay.
wrong. But you get the idea. It's like it's one of the kind of the foundational truths of historical swordsmanship, which is present a threat before you present a target.
Excellent.
And lead with the weapon, not with your face.
That's right. Very good. And let's move on to, after rapier, you showed us in the beginning small sword. Could you show a small sword again for our viewers?
Yeah, sure. eBay's finest.
Fascinating.
Yeah, it's this is actually a little bit damaged because it's really old, but it's a lovely, sharp, short blade, and it's fought. It looks a lot like modern fencing, but it's very short, and the lunge is only like this long. So my opponent would be, if my opponent's back shoulder was against the wall, would be here. It's very, very close. So it's very fast and very nasty.
Yeah.
And it's like I said, it's like a knife fight on steroids. Because
the example you have, is it the French example? Is the French sword?
Okay. Weapons like this were made in such profusion, and the blades might be made one place and the hilts made somewhere else, and they're put together in the shop. So I can't actually say where this comes from, but there's nothing about it that says it couldn't be French. But I can't say for certain whether it's French or English or might even be German.
Okay, interesting. Okay, let's move on from swords to pole arms. Do you also teach pole arms in your school?
As part of Fiore's system, we have spear and poleaxe, yes. And I've done quite a bit of those, obviously. I've also done some quarterstaff. But I'm really a blades person, so I prefer spears and poleaxes to quarterstaffs generally.
Okay.
I don't have spears and quarterstaffs in here because they're out in the shed because they're too long to be used in here. So they're down the end of the garden, and I can use them in the garden.
And you use also daggers and knives in your system,
of course,
correct?
yeah.
And both systems, like in reverse grip, as you showed us, and also in forward grip?
Oh, let me see if I can find that. I have this absolutely beautiful rondel dagger, but what happened was I packed it up to go and teach a course, and it's in a bag somewhere with a bunch of training daggers, and I can't find it. Anyway, okay, so Fiore shows blows with the reverse grip and blows with the forward grip.
Okay.
Yeah. And the only dagger material that I personally study is Fiore's, because it's complete. It has everything you could possibly want, and it fits in with the rest of the system that I'm studying. But there are other dagger sources from various countries. But it's just, he doesn't show any cuts because the weapon he's using is, strictly speaking, a rondel dagger, which has a thick triangular cross section, and its function is to get through medieval clothing and armor.
Yes.
I mean, you can stab a rondel dagger through a male shirt with a bit of effort. We've done penetration tests with various kind of clothing and padding and what have you, and yeah, the dagger tends to do pretty well against most sort of protective equipment.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I couldn't put it through well-made plate armor, and I couldn't put it through a sniper plate. but yeah, it'll go through clothes. It'll go through if you're holding it properly and you're giving it a bit of welly. So we don't deal with cuts in that system at all with the dagger.
Okay, understand. You also teach wrestling and grappling, correct, in your system?
Yeah, it's less of a focus for me. I'm not, by nature, I'm a blade person and a hitter.
Okay.
Much less a grabber and a wrestler.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, wrestling is an essential part of it, and we have by your standards, probably not much of a wrestling curriculum, but by, for our purposes, it's sufficient to get people fencing properly with the longsword, which is really what most of my students are aiming for. But I do have students who specialize more in the wrestling, and that's, I encourage them to cross-train in things like judo and Greco-Roman wrestling and BJJ and things like that, because frankly, you'll get better wrestling from those instructors than you will from me, because I know enough to understand how it fits into the system and whatever, but I'm not by nature a wrestler.
Do you teach also armored fighting?
I have done. I don't do it very much because, I mean, I teach the, if you like, the forms of armored fighting to most of my students, but to do armored fighting properly, you have to have armor.
Yeah, the same.
And 15th century armor at the sort of quality you need to be able to train in it, it's massively expensive. I mean, 10,000 euros would be a good start.
Yeah, true.
Right. And I know people who've spent 40,000 euros on a suit of armor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Those people don't have kids. So fair enough. But I mean, armor is, I have just the helmet here. I don't have the rest of the cuirasses in
beautiful.
Finland, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it's extremely robust, and the thing that most people don't really get about it is, even though it's quite heavy, because it's distributed, you can do an assault course in it.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, I couldn't do a pull-up wearing armor, but I know people who can.
Yeah.
And there was a famous knight of the late 14th, early 15th century called Jean Lemaitre II, who was also known as Marshal Boucicaut because he was Marshal of France. He actually led the vanguard of the French knights at Agincourt in 1415, was captured and ended up dying in captivity in England about 4 years later. But anyway, he was a legendarily good knight, right? And one of his party tricks, one of his feats of arms, was he would vault onto his horse in full armor without using his hands.
This is
right? Okay. And another one, you know, siege ladders, where you have this, you have a town with a great big wall, like maybe, I don't know, 10 meters high or whatever, and you have a ladder that goes up against the wall, and you climb up the ladder and you fight the people at the top, and they try and push the ladder off the wall and what have you, right? One of Marshal Boucicaut's feats of arms was he would climb up the siege ladder using only his hands from underneath. But he's climbing like this with just his hands up a siege ladder. So he's basically doing one-arm pull-ups in armor.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, you know, armor combat, you gotta be fit.
Of course.
And you've got to be rich.
Yeah, of course.
So I don't teach it very much because most of my students aren't that rich and most of them aren't nearly that fit, to be strictly fair. I mean, to be really fair, is for most people it's the money that's the issue.
Yeah, it's money.
Yeah, it's hard to justify such an expense for the sake of basically fighting your friends.
Yeah, of course, I understand. I think we all have these problems with students buying an armor. I mean, it's not an option for most people. I mean, I fully understand. Yes.
And of course, that was true in period as well. I mean, armor is the symbol of a knight, and it was expensive back then. I mean, hugely expensive. And of course, there was the cheap armor that the poorer soldiers could get their hands on, and there was the expensive armor, which, you know, one of the great things about medieval culture and knightly culture in particular is, for example, when two knights were jousting, very often they were jousting for the armor and the horse. Whoever won got to keep their opponent's armor and their horse.
Wow.
And sometimes they actually got to keep the person as well and take them back and ransom them back to their family. Right? So they were playing for very high stakes.
Yeah, of course.
Right? And of course, the armor is like, firstly, you've got to wear your best armor because you can fight better in your best armor. But if you lose, you might lose your best armor.
Yeah.
Maybe you should wear your second best armor. No, because I'm a knight and damn it, I'm going to win because, you know, renown and prowess and all that sort of stuff.
Of course.
Yeah, it's a really interesting culture.
Very.
It reminds me of, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please go ahead.
I watched the movie Grease with my wife and kids recently, and there's that bit at the end where Danny is racing they're racing in the cars at Thunder Road, and they're racing for pink slips. So the winner gets to keep the opponent's car. Same thing.
Yes, I remember that scene very well. Exactly. Yeah, very good point. Yeah. I have another. Do you teach archery as well?
I don't teach it though. I mean, I've done archery in various forms, and I've made a few bows because I'm a woodworker. So, you know, making bows is kind of fun, and you know, I make my own strings and, you know, do it all semi-properly. But no, I don't. I mean, I've taught a few of my students to shoot bows a bit, but no, I don't teach it, not to any level.
Okay, let's move on to the last part of our interview. Let's talk about the value system in martial arts.
Okay. Sure.
What kind of a value system, I mean, do you think, first of all, martial arts should have a value system, yes or no?
Yes, obviously, because fundamentally you're teaching people how to hurt other people, or to murder other people. I mean, medieval martial arts are, from a modern legal standpoint, they are murder, plain and simple. You know, a modern knife fighting manual will be like, okay, you're unarmed and somebody attacks you with a knife and do this, do that. And Fiore has those, but he will also show you how, as the person with the knife, you should murder the unarmed person when he tries to defend himself. If he tries to defend himself like this, break his arm like that and stab him, right? There's absolutely no sense of it being any kind of self-defense in a kind of modern from a modern legal perspective. It is a military art for people who, if you end up on the battlefield and you haven't got a knife, you're just going to get killed, right? And that's shame on you for dropping your knife, you twit. Why would you do that? I mean, right? And it's from an armed culture, right? Where if you just wear a chainmail shirt and a sword and a dagger, you're obviously not looking for trouble, right? You're not in armor. You're not looking for trouble. Yeah. It's very different to, modern culture.
Yes.
So as I see it, we are teaching murder, and it would simply be unethical to not include some deliberate understanding of what that means and what it entails. Okay, so I mean, I'm actually one of the chapters in my theory and practice book is on ethics, and it's based on an exercise we would do in the advanced class where I would give them a question, and the next week they would come back and answer the question, or they would send me an email with their answer to the question. And like one of the questions was, when is it okay to stab somebody in the face?
Yeah.
Right? And it was really clear from my students, some of them just could not comprehend the idea that it was actually a sharp sword in the face. They looked at it entirely from a sport fencing standpoint, right? That's fine. Some were basically sociopaths.
Yeah.
Like, well, when I feel like it.
Yeah.
Okay. But the thing is, all of them thought about the question and answered it for their own satisfaction. So I don't believe in imposing a specific code of ethics on my students. My job is, I'm a consulting swordsman. If they have a particular sword related problem, they call me, I go over and I help them with it. Okay. I'm not their parent. I'm not their guru. I'm not their sensei or anything like that. Right. I'm a hired professional. Think of it like we talked about Fabris and Christian IV of Denmark.
Yeah.
You think when Fabris shows up to give the king his fencing lesson, who has the moral authority? Right? Who is the person in charge?
Yeah, of course.
Right? There's no question. It's the king, right? I mean,
of course, it's the king.
Fabris isn't even a knight, let alone a lord, let alone a prince, let alone a king. Right? He's not. He doesn't even exist on that scale. Yes. Right? So there's absolutely no sense of Fabris giving King Christian an ethics lesson.
Of course.
Right. So it's not my job to impose my sense of ethics on my students. Right. I have to set them an example of ethical behavior by stating my ethical code and then being seen to live by it. But I don't believe it's my place to impose any kind of moral authority on my students. Right. I do require them to consider the moral aspect of what we're doing. And because it's historical martial arts, it has no real relevance in modern street self-defense. So we don't have to worry about self-defense law, situational awareness, all the stuff that goes along with actual proper self-defense training. We don't have to, they're not soldiers, well, some of them are soldiers, and in their day job, they have to deal with, when is it legitimate to shoot somebody, but they don't have to deal with that in their fencing club.
No.
Yeah. So some students do treat the whole thing as a kind of a fantasy cosplay thing where, yes, it's real martial arts, but they're not interested in training with the sharp swords. They're not interested in doing the sort of really intense sort of operant conditioning style training where we basically teach people to be able to actually stab somebody.
Yes.
They prefer this kind of safer aspect of it, and other people are most interested in, if you like, the ethical dimension of using blades.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so I think it's really important. I think that any anyone teaching a martial art that it's different with like boxing, for example. Boxing is not intended for killing people. It's intended for like fighting people in a very controlled environment, and there are clear win conditions. And so long as you abide by the rules and fight with proper sportsmanship and what have you, if you punch the person too hard and they die, that's very unfortunate, but it's not your fault.
No.
Right? So there really isn't an ethical component there, so long as you, here are the stated rules, here is the kind of understood codes of conduct, and you abide by that, you are ethically pure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Blades are a lot more ambiguous because we don't have that environment, which is the real thing, available to us.
Yeah.
Right? And so we have to come at it through lots of different angles.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think of it as, I've got an article on this called Spot the Bullshit. Because in any drill, in any scenario that we're training, there's always at least one dollop of bullshit. So, for example, we might be going full speed and with full intent, but the swords are blunt and more flexible and have rubber points on them, and we're wearing protective equipment.
Yeah, of course.
Right? So that's bullshit. Okay. Or we might be using sharp swords and no protection, but we're not actually trying to hit each other.
Exactly. That's right.
Or we might be, the permutations are endless. Right? Or it could be we are using sharp swords and we're going at full speed, but we have only this very constrained series of techniques that we're going to be doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's always bullshit somewhere. But the thing is, if you train in all these different environments, you've trained without each particular dollar for bullshit as well as with it.
Yeah.
Right. So you know what difference the sharp swords make, and you know what difference the high speed makes. You know what difference the intent to strike makes. And you can, from that, you can sort of angulate in on this central core thing that we can never actually get our hands on, which is actually the truth of it. Right? Yes. Because if you ever find yourself in a real sword fight, then things have gone really, really badly wrong.
Yeah,
right? That should never happen.
Absolutely.
So.
Okay, thank you very much for your insights. Just at the end, at the end for our viewers, you can. We are going to put links to your books where they can buy your books, your DVDs, excellent. And as well, if they want to take online lessons with you, they can contact you on your website directly. Am I correct? Okay.
Yeah, I have online courses and I have books. I don't have any DVDs, but I do have online courses and books. That's all right. And you can find them all at my website, which is guywindsor.net. But if you just stick Guy Windsor into Google, there are only two of us. One of them is an actor, an American actor living in Singapore, I believe, and the other one is me. So okay. It's really like I have a very unusual name, and so I'm quite easy to find on the internet.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, Guy, at the end, do you want to say anything to our viewers, share something with them here on our channel?
Well, I'm guessing that most of your viewers are martial artists.
Yes.
And I have spent an awful lot of time doing martial arts that are not my own, so not historical swordsmanship. And I'd just like to, what's the best way to put it? To my mind, there is, pretty much every martial art I've ever seen has value, and they all have different approaches, and they come from different cultures, and they have different intended outcomes. So some are optimized for winning gold medals in the Olympics, and some are optimized for surviving street fights in the in Verona of the 16th century. But I like to think that it's all one big family, and we all just speak different dialects of the same language. So if any martial artist who has no experience with swords sees one of my classes somewhere or other, come along, you'll always be welcome. Because we're all martial artists together, and the particular martial art we practice is less important than the fact that we all understand what it is, what we mean when we say we do martial arts.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing your ideas and showing us your weapons. I'm sure many people love to say they love that. Thank you very much. And also your books, magnificent interview. And thanks a lot for everything. And I wish you a nice day then. Thank you.
Thanks, Manisha.